On today's show, the Cavs lose on Sunday to the Detroit Pistons in a game I think they very easily could have won if not for some poor lineup decisions from Cavs head coach Kenny Atkinson. I'll tell you what those were on today's edition of Locked on Cavs.
You are Locked on Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everybody. My name is Danny Cunningham, and I cover the Cleveland Cavaliers over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, and you're listening to another edition of Locked on Cavs, a part of the Locked on Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in all of America. You can find this show and any other Locked on podcast anywhere you get them. That's Apple, that's Spotify, that's anywhere else. Please, as we get started, make sure you hit this thumbs up button on YouTube, click subscribe wherever you're listening, and hit the notification bell on YouTube as well, so you don't miss the latest from us here at Locked on Cavs. And on Sunday, the Cavs lose to the Detroit Pistons 114-110 in a game that I put on Kenny Atkinson. I think that there are certainly things that the team could have done much better. Don't get me wrong. Like the players are ultimately not blameless in this game. And the second quarter is something we will dive into, and why that is something that just needs to get better, and why I don't think this ultimately is their worst loss of the season. But this was a game where the Cavs bench just got absolutely crushed during it. And part of this is, and you do have to always give context when you talk about these types of things. Part of it is the Cavs were down 4 rotation players again, because Max Strus still has not played. Jared Allen was out sick. Larry Nance Jr. is still out. Dean Wade missed his second straight game with a knee contusion. So that's part of this, right? When you are missing as many guys as the Cavs are missing, you then in turn have to go deeper into your bench. And I think that's part of the reason why the Cavs ultimately did lose this game, because they just quite frankly didn't have enough. And that's not the fault of the players at that point. But one of the things that really stood out to me was the start of the second quarter and the start of the fourth quarter. So the Cavs won the first quarter against the Pistons 28-19. I didn't think it was some impressive offensive performance, but I did think that the Cavs defensive activity level was really, really good at the start of this game. They forced a lot of turnovers. They held Detroit to like 26% shooting in the first quarter. There was a lot of really good stuff defensively in that first quarter. And really, I think throughout the night, like they had a good defensive third quarter. I thought for the most part, at least the back half of the fourth quarter was really impressive defensively. But the second quarter, they gave up 47 points. And part of that was because Dennis Jenkins for the Pistons hit 6 threes in the quarter. And hey, that kind of happens at times. Like, I don't want to say the Cavs are blameless there, but also you have to give a guy credit when he makes shots like that. But the thing that I think really stood out about the start of that quarter, because the Cavs were up by 9, and then instantly it felt like that lead was cut down to 6, was the lineup that Kenny Atkinson put out to start that quarter, and then again to start the fourth quarter, because neither time he did it, it worked. And that lineup was Lonzo Ball, Naquan Tomlin, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and Jalen Tyson. That group so far, entering today, had played a total of 16 possessions together, according to Cleaning the Glass, which is a very small sample size. However, in that sample size, they had a net rating of minus 87.5, which is horrible, right? Like, you don't need to know much about analytics to know that's a really bad lineup. And this is a lineup I think is missing a lot of space, because yes, Donovan Mitchell is somebody who's awesome, and I thought he had a relatively good game in this one. But Lonzo Ball has lost, I think, all league-wide respect as a shooter. Like, teams are just not going to close out on him. The 1 3 that he took in this game could not have been more open, and he left it short. He did not have a very good game. Jalen Tyson, who has been a good shooter, but I don't necessarily think NBA teams look at him as the dead-eye threat that he has kind of become, and he didn't have a good game in this one either, and that's part of the reason why the Cavs lost. And then Evan Mobley, who made a couple of threes in this game, but I don't think has like league-wide respect right now as a three-point shooter. Naquan Tomlin, who is not necessarily somebody that teams are willing to let Naquan Tomlin shoot the basketball. I think that's the fair way to put it. So that is a lineup that really has struggled offensively when it's been together. And Detroit came into this game with one of the best defenses in basketball, and I thought they did a lot of really good things defensively as well. But that's almost like the Cavs are playing offense with one hand tied behind their back with that lineup. In the 3 minutes that it played on Sunday, that group was outscored 10-3, which I just don't think necessarily surprises anybody, And I think that because they got off to a poor start offensively in the second quarter, it bled into their defense in the second quarter. And that is something that allowed the Pistons to just really rip the nets in that quarter. And yes, like I said, Dennis Jenkins killed them, hit 6 threes. Like, at a certain point, you have to tip your cap. Some of them were tougher than other ones. But I just thought overall, like, that to me was so much more about the offense struggling and having like they opened up with just 3 really bad possessions right in a row, and it made things really challenging for them. And I look at that and said, okay, that was a really, really bad moment. And that's something that allowed the Pistons back in the game because they were down by as many as 9, I believe it was. And then the Cavs were down at halftime. They won that second quarter by 19 points. And I think it all started with that initial lineup that was out there to start the second quarter. And then when it was out there again to start the fourth quarter, it was bad again. The Cavs had cut it to, I believe, 5 points they were trailing by after the third quarter because the Cavs won the first quarter by 9. They won the second quarter by 5. And they did win the fourth quarter by 1 too. But it was because of the fact that they got just blasted in the second quarter that they were down. But they did a good job in the second quarter of fighting back. They cut Detroit's deficit. I believe they actually took the lead at one point in the third quarter. And then they were down by 5 entering the fourth. That lineup goes out there again, and then the Cavs are down by 13, right? Like that to me was I don't want to say an inability because that's not true, but Kenny Atkinson could have made an adjustment there, and he didn't. And while I understand that the bench is a little short right now because guys are out, I also look at it as, shouldn't that mean that you can rely on your starters just a little bit more in this game? And I do think another part of the reason, because I think Donovan was really good in this game. Darius wasn't great. Thought he did some good stuff inside the arc. And I think he was 7 of 8 inside the arc. And the one he missed, like, I don't know how it didn't go down. Missed all 7 threes he took, which part of the reason why the Cavs lost this game is because they shot 32% on threes, is what it is. On a lot of shots, I think that they'd be happy to take again. But Donovan Mitchell in this game only played 33 minutes. And he was the guy that led the Cavs in minutes. And I just look at that and say, he's a plus 10, who's really good. He's obviously the Cavs' best player by a wide margin right now. And in a game against a good Detroit Pistons team that is at the top of the East, I understand that you don't want to, as a staff, as a team, deviate too much from who you are on a regular basis. I think that you want to try and keep things as routine as possible. But on a night or afternoon, I guess, because it's only 7:00 in the evening as I record this right now. But on an afternoon where you are missing so many guys and you get off to such a good start that you can have your starters maybe play a little bit more, considering too, they're without Wade, they're without Allen. And I think Nance and Strus are in a separate bucket because they've been long-term injuries. But you also have Sam Merrill, who is on a bit of a minutes restriction. I don't know that it was necessarily like the tightest of restrictions, but I also don't think they wanted to play him 30 minutes in this game. And you could say, okay, can you ask more of Donovan Mitchell in this game? I think you could have. And part of it too, to be fair here, at the end of the second quarter, because Donovan normally checks back in with about 3 minutes and some change left before the half, and then plays the end of the second half, or the end of the second quarter, end of the first half. Part of it was there was a long break between stoppages in that quarter. And I felt like in that moment, Kenny Atkinson called the timeout, maybe a possession or two too late. And what I believe was a 3-point lead for the Pistons turned into ultimately a 10-point lead at the end of the second quarter, partially because of that. And I look at that and say there were little coaching mistakes that I think Kenny Atkinson made in this game that cost the Cavs. Now, does that mean that everybody else is exempt from blame in this game? No, absolutely not. Not in the slightest bit. Evan Mobley needs to be better than he was. Darius Garland needs to shoot the basketball better. Jalen Tyson did not have a good game. Lonzo Ball was horrible in this game. All of those things remain true. But I do look at this and say, had this group as a team been put in a little bit of a better position to win this game, been set up a little bit more for success, would they have done it? I think the answer to that is yes. And I am very hesitant to get on this podcast or, over at my Substack, The Inside Shot. I'm very hesitant to blame coaches for things because ultimately I think like Kenny Atkinson can't go out there and make baskets. Kenny Atkinson can't go out there and get stops defensively. And I think ultimately it's on the guys to go out there and do it. And more often than not, they've not done that so far this year. at least not in the way that we expected them to. I mean, they are 20-17 technically. More often than not, they have come through, but I just think the record is disappointing, and that's fair to say. But this is one of the first times where I look at it and say, I think some of the lineups that they played really did cost them a basketball game. And had they won this game, it would have been 4 straight. I think everyone would have been feeling really good about things. But instead, this is another loss that hurts. And like, you have to, at this point, 37 games into the season, you have to start looking at the standings. That type of thing has to matter. And this loss right now is the difference between the Cavs being in 5th place in the Eastern Conference and the Cavs being in 8th place in the Eastern Conference. That's where they will wake up at, unless another game later affects it. But as I record this, they are in 8th place in the Eastern Conference, nearly half the way through the season. So these wins and losses really are starting to matter. And the Cavs at a certain point have to realize that it's time to really step on the gas and turn this thing around. And maybe that'll be the case. But this was, to me, it feels like a missed opportunity for the Cavs. And a big part of that was because of the atrocious second quarter they played. It wasn't just the defense that gave up 47 points in the second quarter. I actually thought it started on the other end of the floor. I'll tell you why next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with Prize Picks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down, and Prize Picks lets you stay in control. Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on player projections. No drafts, no waiting, just pick more or less and play your way. You can get started on Prize Picks because it's quick and simple. The app's super easy to navigate and use. It's made watching games more engaging, especially when you're following an individual's certain performance, right? Like maybe it's passing yards, receptions, things like that. That's what it's like on Prize Picks. Plus, you've got options like Flex Play, where you can still get paid even if one of your picks does end up missing. They also have early payouts, a new feature that's a total game changer, because if a player starts hot, you can cash out before the game even ends. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. And thank you to those of you that make Locked On Cavs your first listen every single day. And if you haven't, go check out the Locked On Cavs Everydayer Club. It's access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Cavs, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Plus an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. The Cavs gave up 47 points in the second quarter, and defensively, they need to be better. There's no other way to say that. Like, they cannot allow a team to go 8 of 10 from beyond the arc in the quarter. They cannot allow the Pistons to have as much success in the paint as they had in that quarter. I believe they had 18 of their 40 paint points came in the second quarter. A big part of that was Evan Mobley only played 5 minutes in the second quarter. I think part of this also was Donovan Mitchell only played 5 minutes in the second quarter, which that does matter here. But the reason why I think those things in particular, especially with Donovan, because he's not thought of as a defensive stopper. The reason why I think that matters is I think the Cavs in that quarter really allowed Detroit to get going because they had bad offensive process. And I think that the bad offensive process that they had really parlayed into Detroit being able to take advantage of it, where the Cavs had 5 turnovers in that quarter. They didn't shoot the ball well. They shot 30%. They were 3 of 9 on threes, but they allowed Detroit to get going because they had so many empty offensive possessions in a row. And offensively, like, you, first of all, give Detroit credit for playing really good defense, but this gets back to that lineup that I brought out there, that the Pistons were able to get back in the game and build confidence, because when that group's out there, the Cavs can't create anything offensively. So far this season, that group has played roughly 12 minutes. They're minus 19 in those minutes. And they're minus 19 because that group is 2 of 17 combined from the floor, because there's no space to operate offensively. Because, like I said, Naquan Tomlin, not a shooter. Lonzo Ball, not a shooter. Evan Mobley, not a shooter. Jalen Tyson's been really good, but I just don't think that he's somebody on scouting reports at this time that is like a heavy closeout guy. So I think it makes it easier for teams to defend the Cavs. And I think in turn, that allowed the Pistons to really get out and go, because they had 12 fast break points in the second quarter alone. They finished the day with just 19. So they did a lot of their damage because the Cavs missed shots or turned the basketball over. They had 12 fast break points. They had 18 points in the paint. A lot of that because Evan Mobley only played half of that quarter. They turned the Cavs over 5 times. Some of those were live ball turnovers. Some of them were not. But like that to me really speaks to, yes, the Cavs need to be better defensively than they were. They were not good enough defensively in that quarter. But this was, I think, more of an offensive issue where they cannot have lineups like this. And yes, part of this is you have to play who's available. And the Cavs only had so many guys available in this game. And there's not really much you can do about that. So I do understand that. But I do think that the pairings that in which they have can change things. Like, would the Cavs have been better off offensively in this game or just in the second quarter alone? Would they have been better off playing Craig Porter Jr. those minutes instead of Lonzo Ball? Lonzo in this game played 9 minutes and 40 seconds. He was a minus 18. Part of that was because Donovan Mitchell hit a free throw with him on the floor in the closing minutes. So really played about 19 minutes and was a minus 19. And it felt like it. And it was not all Lonzo's fault. Like, it wasn't as if he was out there and just actively contributing. I mean, he was part of it because he was just not good offensively. And he had 2 turnovers in the 10 minutes that he played, 9.5 minutes he played. But part of it's the lineups. Part of it was the Pistons didn't really guard him, right? And that takes away from the spacing. They're not going to guard Naquan Tomlin. And I just wonder that having guys on the floor that can't shoot or put pressure on the rim with the basketball in their hand, you can have room for like 1, maybe 2. But the Cavs had too many of those guys on the floor in that stretch. And then it makes life more difficult defensively because it's not only the fast break points. It's not only the points off turnovers. It's also when you are missing as many shots as the Cavs missed in that quarter, you can't set your defense because on paper, some of the lineups they had in the second quarter had some really good defenders. And it's not only that one specific lineup that I keep talking about because the lineup of Lonzo, Thomas Bryant, Darius Garland, Sam Merrill, and Jalen Tyson was a minus 13 in 10 minutes that it played. Like, that was actually the worst 5-man group the Cavs played in this game. I don't think that was the one that I think the first one allowed for like things to snowball and the second one had trouble stopping it, partially because Darius Garland missed all 7 threes that he shot in this game. But it's so much more difficult to defend when you can't set your defense, when you never are making the other team take the ball out of the basket. And I thought that was the biggest problem at the start of the second quarter. And it wasn't the big problem the entire way through. Like, the defense was not good enough, but the Cavs gave the Pistons every reason to feel good about themselves. And they had a chance with a strong start to the second quarter, or at least an even start to the second quarter, to then say, okay, well, yeah, maybe the Pistons are playing a little bit better, but the Cavs are still in a good spot. And instead they had to start fighting their way uphill. And that was a battle they could never get on the other side of. And we have seen that so frequently. And that's the area in which this did feel like a bad loss for the Cavs. Like, I don't think, and we will go into it in a little bit, I don't think this was anywhere near the worst loss the Cavs have had this season. They've had far worse losses than this one. But I think that because they were fighting an uphill battle for so much of this game, that's part of the reason why it felt like that. That's part of the reason why this felt like a loss from earlier in the season. And they looked good early on, right? Like, this was a game that was not without good things from the Cavs. They outscored the Pistons in 3 of the 4 quarters. I thought defensively in the first, third, and fourth quarter did a really good job for the most part. But they can't be a great team unless they figure out what's going on in the second quarter. Because, and Serena Winters brought this up during pregame availability with Kenny Atkinson about how bad the team has been in the second quarter. I think they're the second worst second quarter team in the NBA right now. You can't be a great team and have a quarter be that bad. Part of it is because the Cavs have had so many different lineups. Part of it is because they've really had to go deep into their bench in order to make things happen. But that is something that needs to be very high on the priority list. And health is part of it, right? Like, they need to get guys back. They can't have 4 rotation guys missing every other night and expect to be an elite level team. Those things add up. Like, you can win games here and there, but you're not going to be an elite level team. But that's something that this group, I really do think, needs to figure it out. and they need to figure it out sooner than later. And that's something that Donovan Mitchell echoed in the locker room after this game. I'll tell you what he said and why I think it really is time for the Cavs to turn it on next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is a better way. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you can make. And that's why this episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Quo makes everything simple. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Plus, everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or your computer, and you can even keep your existing number. Plus, Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so that details never slip through the cracks. And it's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnba. That's QUO.com/lockedonnba. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. So I wanted to dive into a little bit of what Donovan Mitchell said after the Cavs lost to the Pistons on Sunday, because I do think that Donovan tends to be a pretty insightful guy in the locker room. I think that he's a good voice for this team, and I think that he doesn't really ever back away from questions. And I think that he gives an honest opinion more often than not. And I thought that was, again, the case on Sunday after the Cavs lost to the Pistons. And there were a couple of questions and answers that I want to discuss. And one of the things that I asked him, because if you think back to earlier this season, when the Cavs were going through some tough times, Donovan, I believe, called himself a sicko. Like, he just seemed excited that this was a team that had to go through a little bit of adversity after last year. I don't want to say was adversity free during the regular season, but it was minimized. They have faced more adversity this year in the regular season than they did all of last year. I think that is something that is absolutely true. So I asked him about it, like if his mentality or mindset about the adversity is still the same. And he said, quote, "I don't think excited is the word anymore, but I think this is going to help us. I mean, these are situations that at least now we have stuff to look back on and kind of go from there. This one hurts because we understand that, look, it's time, right? But yeah, every time you lose, there's something to learn from it, and you take it and go from there." And the thing that stuck out to me that I wanted to talk about from this quote was the "it's time" part of things. And that I think is important because the Cavs have, I think, played much more serious basketball lately. Like, I don't look at this game that they lost to the Pistons. This was not an effort issue. They did not, like, they had an effort, they had intensity. They lost to, and hey, give the Pistons credit. They're a very good basketball team. They're at the top of the Eastern Conference right now. Do I think that they're like a true championship contender? I'm not sure that I'm there. I think they're a guy and a half short, but like, that's a really good basketball team. And I don't think that there is a ton of shame in losing to them, even if this was a game that the Cavs probably should have won and certainly feel like they should have won. But it wasn't because a lack of effort. It wasn't because of a lack of intensity. It wasn't because of a lot of things that we saw plague the Cavs earlier this year. It was because, one, they didn't make enough shots, and two, they had a really bad quarter. Now, those things need to get cleaned up too. But I do think this recent stretch does point to the Cavs being able to say, hey, we are headed in the right direction. And I don't think that them losing this game should erase what they have done. Now, had they lost to Denver on Friday, given who was out for the Nuggets, maybe that would have erased it. But I don't think losing to the Pistons erases the basketball the Cavs have played over the last 2 weeks at this point. Now, we'll see what happens when they play next on Tuesday against the Indiana Pacers, because if they don't look good in that game, then I think you start to erase a little bit of it. But I do think that this isn't some loss that you look at and say, one of the worst losses of the season. Is it a game the Cavs probably should have won? I think so. I think they were a few lineup tweaks away from potentially winning this game, as I talked about throughout, the majority of this episode. But I also don't think that it says that they're not heading in the right direction anymore. I think that they are a group that still is trending positively. That matters. That's something to keep in mind. And I do think more importantly than anything, and this is going to sound crazy considering they had a quarter where they gave up 47 points, but I think this is a group that has been so much better defensively as of late. And that's a big part of the reason why I think it's okay to say, okay, you know what? You had a bad quarter. It cost you a game. That is what it is. But this is a group that has sort of righted some of their wrongs in some areas. Now, they need to be better rebounding the basketball. They were not good enough on Sunday and on Friday as well against Denver, taking care of the basketball. They need to be better in those areas. The turnovers is a bit of a new thing. The rebounding is not a new thing. That's been an issue for quite some time. But I do think if you start to look at what has now become a bit of an extended stretch, go back from December 22nd, which I believe was that game against Charlotte, the Cavs, for the most part, have been a relatively solid defensive team. And that wasn't necessarily always the case prior to it. But since then, they've been number 6 team in defense in the NBA. They're allowing 113.2 points per 100 possessions. Offensively, they need to be better. They need to be better offensively. I think that will come in time. I just would not worry about offense because I think this group is very talented on that end. But Donovan also said that they are a defense first team. Now, it can be hard to see that when, like I said, they give up 47 points in a quarter. But I do think that this team, as every team in basketball is, like, this is not a Cavs specific thing. This team is better when they get stops, when they can play against defenses that aren't set, when they can get out in transition a little bit more. Like, I don't think the Cavs should ever be a super fast team. I don't think their personnel is built for that. I do think that them being able to get out and transition a little bit more doesn't always mean fast break points. Sometimes that can mean playing offense against a defense that isn't set or creating mismatches, which is something the Cavs really struggled with at times in this game. So I think that is something that is trending in the right direction. It might not be there yet, but it is trending in the right direction. And he was asked, I believe Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com was the one who asked him this, whether that this feels like a defense first team. And he says at times, and I think that's the issue. There are times in the stretches where it's like, man, this is who we are, stops and run. And then there are times where we don't. And that's part of the inconsistency. And that's correlated to so many things, right? There's so many things that go into that, but we're doing a lot of things better. We're trending upwards. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm always the guy who's like, look, 9, 10, 11, 12 games. Let's continue to hammer that. Tonight just wasn't that, but we're getting there. We're hanging in there and we're continuing to find ways to improve. And I do think that's true, despite the loss to the Detroit Pistons on Sunday. This loss wasn't a good loss. I don't think there are really very many good losses in the NBA, but this isn't a loss that's on the same level as like losing to Charlotte or either loss to Chicago. Like, this is a loss that I think the Cavs can learn and grow from. I do believe that to be true. They have to figure out the bench. That needs to get better. They have to get healthier. I mean, I probably for tomorrow's episode will be looking up their record, what it is when they have 4 guys out missing, because it has not gone well. And I wouldn't expect it to go well for anybody. They've got the most starting lineups in the NBA. This was their 19th different starting lineup that they threw out there on Sunday. So like those things in that context matters. But I do think that Sunday was a good measuring stick because the Pistons are in a spot where the Cavs want to be. They're at the top of the East right now. And I don't know that that's going to last forever. I don't think the Cavs are going to get to the top of the East by the time the regular season ends. But can they be a team that looks like they should be in the conference finals, in the NBA finals by the end of the season? They've got 40 plus games to figure that out. We're almost at the halfway point, and I think it's time for the Cavs to start stepping on the gas even a little bit more than they have over the last 2 weeks or so. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked on Cavs. Please do us a favor as we leave on YouTube. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're listening on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, or whatever else, please make sure you are subscribed because I want you to get the latest Locked on Cavs from me. I will be back tomorrow. Cavs take on the Pacers on Tuesday in Indiana. We will look ahead to that game with Tony East as well. But check us out wherever you get your podcasts. And I will be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.